The air at forward operating base Kestrel was thin and sharp, tasting of dust and diesel fumes. It clung to the back of the throat, a permanent resident in the high, jagged teeth of the Hindu Kush. For Master Gunnery Sergeant Anya Sharma, it was a familiar taste, a bitter communion she'd shared with half a dozen similar landscapes across 2 decades. She stepped off the Osprey's ramp, her boots crunching on the gravel of the flight line. The wind whipped her gray-streaked brown hair across her face, and she tucked it back under her cover with an automatic, practiced motion. At 48, her face was a roadmap of sun and stress, the lines around her eyes etched not by age alone, but by long hours staring through optics and poring over satellite data under the dim glow of a monitor. She was here to fix a problem. FOB Kestrel's supply chain was a disaster. Requisitions were being lost, shipments delayed, and critical assets were sitting unaccounted for in Chronicles boxes, while frontline units made do with scavenged parts. Her official title was Logistics Chief Auditor, a mouthful of bureaucratic jargon that translated to the person from headquarters sent to make everyone's life miserable. She wore the rank of a Master Gunnery Sergeant E9, the pinnacle of the enlisted structure. It was a rank that commanded respect in most circles. This was not one of those circles. As she moved toward the command tent, a group of Marines jogging past slowed to a trot, their eyes lingering on her. They were Force Recon, their movements lean and predatory even during PT. They were young, sculpted by punishing training and a diet of pure arrogance. One of them, a sergeant with a jaw like a block of granite and the word Gator stenciled on his t-shirt, smirked. "Well, look what the Osprey dragged in," he said, his voice carrying easily on the thin air. "Must be inspection season. The rear echelon mafia sent their godmother." His buddies snickered. Sharma didn't break stride, her gaze fixed on the flapping canvas of the command tent. She'd heard it all before. Desk jockey, paper pusher, a master guns who'd earned her rank counting widgets instead of kills. Her uniform, perfectly pressed despite the long flight, and the absence of the salty, sun-bleached patina of a grunt's gear marked her as an outsider, a creature of air-conditioned offices and PowerPoint presentations. Inside the tent, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and nervous energy. Colonel Marcus Thorne stood over a map table, his posture as rigid as the creases in his uniform. He was a man who believed the Marine Corps was forged in crucible and combat, and everything else was just support staff. He glanced up as she entered, his eyes scanning the eagles and chevrons on her collar and sleeve. He saw the rank, but his expression registered only her gender and the crispness of her utilities. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Sharma?" he asked, his tone clipped. He didn't wait for a confirmation. "I'm Colonel Thorne. I've read your file. 22 years in logistics." "Impressive," he said the word impressive, as if it were a synonym for irrelevant. "Colonel," Sharma replied, her voice even and calm. She placed her orders on the corner of his map table. "I'm here to conduct a full-spectrum audit of the FOB's logistical framework." Thorne picked up the papers without looking at them, his focus still on the map. "I'm aware. While you're here, you'll find my Marines are busy fighting a war. We don't have much time for administrative deep dives. My S4 is competent. This is a distraction." The dismissal was clear. She was not a warrior. She was a nuisance. She was a box ticker sent from a higher command that didn't understand the realities on the ground. "My job is to ensure your warfighters have what they need to be effective, Colonel," she stated simply. "If the supply chain is broken, men can die. That's not an administrative issue." Thorne finally looked at her, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "My men are Force Recon, Master Gunnery Sergeant. They can make do. They're not helpless." He gestured vaguely to a corner of the tent. "Find a desk. Try not to get in the way." The message was delivered. She was a guest, an unwelcome one, in a house built for men of action. As she found an unoccupied field desk and began setting up her ruggedized laptop, the flap of the tent opened and the recon sergeant, Gator, strode in. He slapped a requisition form on Thorne's table. "Sir, we need a priority C-130 drop for the new thermal imagers. The ones we have are glitching." OP Griffin is blind at night, he said, then noticed Sharma. He gave a slow, insolent once-over. Master Guns. Didn't expect to see you in the big tent. Thought you'd be down in the warehouse, counting boots. That's enough, Sergeant, Thorne said. His voice laced with mild annoyance, not genuine reprimand. He was used to his recon team swagger. He cultivated it. Sharma ignored the bait. She powered on her laptop, the screen illuminating her focused expression. She could feel their eyes on her back, the colonel's dismissive glare, the sergeant's mocking curiosity. They saw a middle-aged woman with a high rank and clean hands. They saw a logistician. They saw anything but what she was. The central conflict was drawn in the sand right there, their perception against her reality. And in the silence of her own mind, she knew that reality was a far more dangerous thing than they could ever imagine. The tension in the tent was a low hum, the quiet promise of a storm. They thought they knew her. They were wrong. And in a place like this, being wrong could be fatal. The next morning, the dismissal crystallized into a direct challenge. Colonel Thorne called Sharma to the map table, his expression one of grim obligation. 3 members of the recon team stood nearby, including Sergeant Gator Davies, ostensibly there to receive their own orders. But their posture was loose, their attention clearly fixed on the woman being addressed by their CO. Master Gunnery Sergeant, Thorne began, tapping a point on the topographical map. This is Observation Post Vulture. It's a 2-man signals intelligence outpost in the Tangi Valley, 20 clicks from here. Their comms package has fried, and their long-range battery is failing. They've been dark for 12 hours. Sharma studied the map. The terrain was brutal, a maze of sheer cliffs and narrow, winding valleys notorious for ambushes. A standard resupply flight is too risky. The valley provides excellent cover for manpads. Gator scoffed audibly. She knows what a manpad is. Color me impressed. Thorne shot him a look that was more for show than substance. Your assessment is correct, Master Guns. A large, slow-moving bird is out of the question. We're sending a single CH-53 Super Stallion. Low altitude, fast insertion. They'll drop a resupply pod and be out in under 5 minutes, he paused. Then delivered the line she knew was coming. You will be on that flight. Sharma's eyes remained on the map. It wasn't a question. It was an order designed to put her in her place. Sir? She asked, her tone neutral. You're the logistics chief, Thorne said, a thin, condescending smile playing on his lips. You've been here less than a day and you're already questioning my S4's inventory management. You want to see the sharp end of the supply chain? Here's your chance. You will personally escort the replacement comms unit and power cells to OP Vulture. Ensure the handoff is by the book. It was a test and a petty one at that. He was sending an E9 on a delivery run a corporal could handle. He was calling her bluff, forcing the desk jockey to ride into hostile territory. It was his way of saying, this is our world. See if you can handle it. Gator's smirk widened. Don't worry, Master Guns, he drawled, stepping forward. The colonel assigned my team as your personal security detail. We'll make sure you don't get any dust on your uniform. His 2 subordinates, Corporal Miller and a wiry lance corporal named Diaz, chuckled along with him. Miller's laugh was hesitant, his eyes more curious than mocking as he watched Sharma. Your concern is noted, Sergeant, Sharma replied, her voice devoid of emotion. She turned back to Thorne. What's the payload? 1 Pelican case with the TRC-214 comms repeater and 2 BA-5590 batteries, Thorne said. Sergeant Davies' team will handle the equipment. Your job is to supervise. Supervise. Babysit. Be the token high-ranking passenger. She understood perfectly. Understood, Colonel. An hour later, on the flight line, the mockery continued, less subtle now that the colonel wasn't present. As Sharma conducted her own pre-flight inspection of the gear she was personally responsible for, Gator and his team leaned against a stack of sandbags, watching her. She checked the latches on the Pelican case, verifying the waterproof seal. She checked the charge indicators on the batteries, cross-referencing their serial numbers with the manifest on her datapad. Her movements were meticulous, economical, born of a deep-seated professionalism. To the recon Marines, it was hilarious. "Hey, Miller, you see that?" Gator said loudly. "She's checking the batteries. Like the guys at the depot didn't already do that 10 times. Maybe she thinks they'll leak," Diaz chimed in. "Gotta make sure the magic smoke stays inside." Sharma ignored them. She moved to the CH-53, its massive rotors beginning to spin up with a deep, rhythmic whump, whump, whump. She spoke briefly with the crew chief, a young sergeant, asking about the aircraft's maintenance record and current fuel load. The crew chief, accustomed to treating E-9s with a degree of reverence, answered her questions respectfully, but shot a confused glance toward the smirking recon team. As she prepared to board, Gator stepped in her path. He was several inches taller, his bulk casting a shadow over her. "Look, Master Guns, just so we're clear. On the bird, you sit down, you stay quiet, and you don't touch anything. When we land, you stay put until I give the all-clear. We handle the gear, we handle the security. You handle the clipboard. Got it?" The condescension was thick enough to taste. He was speaking to her as if she were a visiting congresswoman, a fragile civilian who might have a panic attack at the first sign of turbulence. Sharma looked up at him. Her gaze was steady, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the wind died down, and in the relative quiet of the spooling turbines, her voice was unervingly calm. "I understand the chain of command, Sergeant, and I understand the fundamentals of operational security. You focus on your job. I'll focus on mine." She stepped around him and climbed into the cavernous belly of the helicopter, taking a seat on the nylon webbing. She buckled herself in, her movements fluid and sure. The recon team followed, clattering aboard with their rifles and gear, taking positions near the ramp. Gator sat opposite her, his rifle held loosely across his chest, his eyes still locked on her, waiting for a crack in her composure. He saw nothing, just a woman in a starched uniform, staring out the open ramp at the receding gravel of FOB Kestrel, her expression as impassive as the mountains they were about to fly into. He saw a logistician. He had no idea he was sitting across from a ghost. The dismissal was total. The stage for the crisis was set. This 53 Super Stallion, callsign Warhorse 2-5, clawed its way through the sky, staying low in the valleys. The ride was rough, the massive helicopter buffeted by unpredictable mountain winds. Sharma sat impassively, her eyes scanning the terrain below, her internal clock ticking. She wasn't looking at the scenery. She was mapping it, identifying potential landing zones, choke points, avenues of approach and escape. It was a habit ingrained so deeply it was subconscious. The recon Marines were relaxed, their conversation punctuated by the deafening roar of the engines and rotors. They were in their element. Then the world turned gray. It wasn't a gradual change. One moment, they were flying under a brilliant, high-altitude sun. The next, they were swallowed by a cloud that wasn't a cloud. It was a dense, violent wall of slate-colored vapor and ice, a freak storm cell boiling up from the valley floor. The temperature inside the cabin plummeted. Condensation bloomed on the metal surfaces. The helicopter lurched violently, dropping 50 feet in a single gut-wrenching plunge. Diaz, the lance corporal, yelped as he was thrown against his harness. Gator grabbed a handhold, his knuckles white, the smirk wiped clean from his face. "What the hell was that?" he yelled over the intercom. The pilot's voice crackled, strained and tight. "Warhorse 2-5 to Kestrel. We've hit an unforecasted microburst. Severe icing. I'm losing lift." A percussive bang, loud even over the engine noise, echoed from above. The main rotor assembly. Red lights flashed across the cockpit console, visible through the open door. "Engine 1 is flaming out," the co-pilot screamed. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. Warhorse 2-5 is going down." Chaos erupted. The helicopter, now crippled, began to auto-rotate, but the pilot was fighting a losing battle against the storm and the terrain. The bird corkscrewed, its heavy tail swinging wildly. Gear that wasn't strapped down became deadly projectiles. A spare helmet skittered across the deck and was sucked out the open ramp into the gray void. Corporal Miller was pale, his eyes wide with terror, gripping his rifle like a holy relic. Gator was shouting orders that no one could hear over the shrieking of tortured metal. "Brace for impact! Brace!" Through it all, Sharma was an island of surreal calm. As the helicopter fell, her training took over, pushing aside the fear that paralyzed the others. Her mind worked with chilling clarity. She wasn't thinking about survival. She was thinking about the sequence of events after the impact. Crash position, brace spine, protect head. Her body followed the mental checklist. She planted her feet wide, tightened her harness until it bit into her shoulders, and crossed her arms over her chest, tucking her chin down. Her eyes were open, darting, assessing. She noted the location of the fire extinguisher, the emergency first aid kit, the Pelican case with the comms gear. Assets. The ground came up to meet them not with a single clean impact, but with a series of brutal, grinding collisions. The tail rotor struck a rock outcropping first, snapping off with a sound like a giant's breaking bone. The fuselage spun, slamming its side into a sloped cliff face. The shriek of tearing metal was absolute. The main rotors, already failing, disintegrated as they chewed into the rocky earth. The world became a violent, disorienting kaleidoscope of noise, pressure, and pain. Sharma felt a vicious jolt as her side of the aircraft crumpled. The nylon seat ripped, and she was thrown sideways, her shoulder slamming into a bulkhead with sickening force. The lights went out. Darkness and the groaning of stressed metal were all that remained. Silence followed. A ringing, profound silence, punctuated by the hiss of hydraulic fluid and the faint crackle of an electrical fire somewhere in the mangled cockpit. The smell of ozone and jet fuel filled the air. Sharma was the first to move. Pain flared in her shoulder, a deep, throbbing ache, but she walled it off. She unbuckled her harness, her fingers finding the release by touch alone in the gloom. She dropped to the canted, debris-strewn deck. "Sound off!" she yelled, her voice a raw, authoritative bark that cut through the dazed quiet. It wasn't the voice of a logistician. It was the voice of command under fire. A groan came from near the ramp. "Miller, I think my leg's broken." "Gator? Diaz?" Sharma called out, already moving toward the sound of Miller's voice. "Here," Gator grunted. He was dazed, a cut bleeding freely above his eye. He's out cold." "The crew." "Pilots," Sharma shouted toward the cockpit. Only the crackling of the fire answered. She found the emergency lighting switch panel by memory, slapping it with the heel of her hand. A single, grim red light flickered on, bathing the wreckage in an infernal glow. The scene was catastrophic. The CH-53 was torn open, its belly exposed to the swirling snow of the still-raging storm. The cockpit was a compressed nightmare of steel and shattered plexiglass. The pilots were gone. Diaz was slumped in his harness, unconscious but breathing. Miller was trying to sit up, his face contorted in agony, his lower leg bent at an unnatural angle. Gator was on his knees trying to clear his head. The young crew chief was dead, his body trapped under a twisted section of the fuselage. The others were faltering, succumbing to shock and injury. The recon sergeant, the tip of the spear, was momentarily broken. In that vacuum, Sharma acted. The crisis had arrived, and the auditor from the rear echelon was about to show them what true competence looked in the face of absolute disaster. This was her environment now. The clean, orderly world of FOB Kestrel was 1,000 miles away. Here, there was only survival, and she was an expert. With the red emergency light painting the mangled interior in hellish strokes, Sharma's methodical calm became a force of nature. While Gator was still wiping blood from his eyes and Miller was biting back screams of pain, she moved. Every action was precise, stripped of wasted motion. "Gator, get on the fire," she commanded, her voice cutting through his daze. She pointed to the fire extinguisher she'd clocked before the crash. "Cockpit, now!" The direct, unambiguous order snapped him out of it. The sergeant, accustomed to giving commands, not taking them from a logistics chief, found himself moving before he could even process the thought. He scrambled toward the front, grabbing the extinguisher. Sharma was already at Miller's side. "Don't move," she said, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its authority. Her hands were gentle but firm as they ran along his leg. Compound fracture, tibia and fibula. She met his pain-filled eyes. "This is going to hurt. A lot. But you have to stay quiet. We don't know who's out there." From her own individual first aid kit, IFAK, she produced a tourniquet and 2 morphine syrettes. The recon Marines had their own advanced kits, but she was faster. She expertly applied the tourniquet high on his thigh to control potential arterial bleeding, noting the time on the strap with a marker. "Miller, look at me. I'm giving you morphine. It'll help, but it'll make you drowsy. Fight it. We need you awake." She administered the drug, then turned her attention to his leg. Using a K-bar she pulled from her boot and a length of salvaged webbing. She began to fashion a makeshift splint. Her knots were perfect, her technique flawless. It was the work of someone who had done this many, many times before. Gator returned, the extinguisher empty, the electrical fire sputtered out. "Cockpit's gone. Pilots." "They didn't make it." He looked at Sharma, who was now checking on the unconscious Diaz. A new, unsettling feeling was dawning on him. Confusion. This wasn't the behavior of a paper pusher. "He has a concussion, but his breathing is stable," Sharma announced after checking Diaz's pupils and pulse. "We need to get him out of the harness before he suffers suspension trauma." Together, she and Gator carefully cut Diaz free and laid him in the recovery position on a relatively clear section of the deck. With the immediate medical crises handled, Sharma's focus shifted. The storm was lessening, the wind's howl diminishing to a low moan. Snow drifted in through the torn fuselage. "Salvage," she said, standing up. The pain in her own shoulder was a dull, angry fire, but she ignored it. "We need an inventory. Water, ammo, batteries, food, comms. Everything." Gator stared at her. "Inventory? Master Guns, we just crashed. We need to secure a perimeter, find a defensible position." "You can't defend a position without water or bullets, Sergeant," she shot back, her voice like flint. "The wreck is a target. We take what we can carry and we move. Fast." The storm masked our crash, but when it clears, the whole valley will be looking for us. She was right. He knew she was right, and it infuriated him. He was the recon team lead. This was his world. But she was thinking 3 steps ahead of him. Sharma moved to the back of the wreck, her eyes scanning the debris. She found the Pelican case, miraculously intact, and dragged it to the center of the cabin. She located their packs, pulling them free from the wreckage. She began systematically emptying them, creating a single, consolidated pile of essential gear. "Gator, check the aircraft's batteries. See if any of the cells are intact. We'll need power for a radio if we can get one working." "Miller," she said, her voice softening again. "You're on lookout. You can't move, but you can see. Yell if you see anything that isn't a rock or a tree." Even in his morphine-hazed state, Miller nodded, dragging his rifle closer. "Aye, Master Guns." The term of respect was automatic, born of the raw competence he was witnessing. Gator heard it, and a muscle in his jaw twitched. He moved to the avionics bay, yanking at twisted panels to access the aircraft's power cells as she'd ordered. He felt like a private being tasked out by a battalion commander. Sharma worked with an efficiency that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. She field-stripped 2 of the rifles, including the one belonging to the dead crew chief, creating a small pile of spare parts. Bolts, firing pins, springs. She consolidated all the ammunition, counting every round. She found the aircraft's emergency survival kit, adding its contents to the growing mound. Signal mirror, thermal blankets, water purification tablets. Her logistics background wasn't about counting widgets in a warehouse. It was about understanding the intricate ecosystem of supply and demand in a hostile environment. It was about knowing precisely what it took to keep a soldier alive and fighting. Here, in the wreckage, her skills were not administrative. They were paramount. She found the aircraft's flight recorder, the black box, and the emergency locator transmitter, ELT. She held the ELT in her hand for a moment. "We could activate this," Gator said, coming back with two heavy, miraculously undamaged battery packs. "SAR will be on us in a few hours. And so will every insurgent cell within 30 clicks," Sharma countered without looking at him. "This valley is crawling with them. Activating this beacon is a dinner bell, and we're the meal. We don't signal until we're in a defensible position of our own choosing, or we're out of options." She placed the ELT in her pack. She had made the decision, not him. Her movements were now starting to trigger a sense of unease in Gator. They weren't just efficient. They were tactical. As she moved through the wreck, her steps were silent. She stayed low, using the broken fuselage for cover as she peered out into the snow-dusted landscape. Her body language was that of a hunter, not an accountant. She paused, frozen, staring at a ridge 200 meters away. Gator followed her gaze but saw nothing but snow and rock. "What is it?" he whispered. "Nothing," she said, but her eyes narrowed. Yet she pulled a small monocular from her vest, a piece of personal gear, not standard issue for a logistician. She scanned the ridge for a full minute, her focus absolute. "All right," she said, turning back, her mind made up. "We move north. There's a box canyon about a click from here. Single point of entry, good cover, and a freshwater spring, if my map reading is right." "How do you know that?" Gator challenged. "You glanced at the map for 2 minutes in the CO's tent." Sharma looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something cold and hard in her eyes, a glimpse of a past he couldn't comprehend. "Because it's my job to know the terrain my people are operating in, Sergeant. I memorized the AO before I even stepped foot in it. Now, we need to move Miller. Let's build a litter." As they began fashioning a travois from broken poles and webbing, Gator watched her hands. They were steady, calloused in ways a pen pusher's shouldn't be. She moved with a purpose that bordered on predatory. The initial shock of the crash was wearing off, replaced by a creeping, terrifying suspicion. Who was this woman? The suspicion solidified into hard fact less than an hour later. They had moved out from the crash site, a miserable, slow procession. Gator and Sharma carried the litter with Miller, while Diaz, now conscious but groggy, stumbled along behind them, carrying a consolidated pack. Sharma had set a brutal pace, pushing them to put distance between themselves and the wreck. She called a halt in a small, defensible cluster of rocks. "Water break. 2 minutes," she ordered, her voice a low pant. She was scanning their back trail, her eyes constantly in motion. It was then that Gator saw it. A flicker of movement on the same ridge she had been watching earlier. A man, then another, silhouetted against the gray sky. They carried rifles. "Contact," Gator hissed, dropping to one knee and raising his rifle. 2 men, ridgeline, 9 o'clock. "I see them," Sharma said calmly. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded like she had been expecting them. "They're scouts. They found the wreck. They'll be reporting back to a larger element. We need to get out of sight. Break contact," Diaz said, his voice shaky. "Too late for that," Sharma countered. "They have our trail in the snow. They'll run us down. Miller can't move fast, and we're exposed here." Her eyes did a quick, cold calculation of the terrain. "We don't run. We fight. On our terms." Gator stared at her, dumbfounded. "Fight? We're 3 effectives and 1 casualty against who knows how many. Standard procedure is to evade and survive." "Standard procedure applies to standard situations, Sergeant," Sharma said, her gaze locking onto his. "They're expecting us to run. They'll be arrogant, moving fast to catch us in the open. We're not going to be there. We're going to be waiting for them." She pointed to a narrow pass 50 yards ahead, a natural choke point littered with boulders. "There. We set up a kill zone. Diaz, you take the high ground on the left. You've got a good field of fire down the trail. Gator, you're with me on the right. We'll initiate." Miller will put you behind that big rock formation. Your rear security. If anything comes from behind, you make noise. It was a classic L-shaped ambush. Simple, deadly, and perfectly suited to the terrain. It was a plan a seasoned infantry squad leader would devise. Coming from the master gunnery sergeant of logistics, it was jarring. "You're taking command?" Gator asked, the question a mix of disbelief and insubordination. Sharma's head snapped toward him. The calm patience was gone, replaced by a diamond-hard authority that tolerated no argument. "I am the senior enlisted Marine present, and I have a plan to keep us alive. You are a sergeant, and you are dazed. Your man has a concussion, and the other has a shattered leg. We are compromised. Do you have a better plan?" Gator's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't. His training was screaming at him to defer to her rank, but his pride was screaming louder. But looking at the cold certainty in her eyes, pride seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. "No, Master Guns," he finally ground out. "Then get your man in position," she ordered. They moved with a desperate, newfound purpose. Gator helped Diaz scramble up the rocks to his overwatch position, while Sharma carefully positioned Miller, ensuring his leg was stable and he had a clear line of sight back the way they came. Then she and Gator took cover behind a broad, flat-topped boulder that gave them a perfect angle on the trail. Sharma laid her rifle on the rock, checked her magazine, and chambered around. Her movements were a study in economy. She pulled the monocular and scanned the trail again. "They're coming." Six-man team, moving in a loose column. Overconfident. She put the monocular away. "Let them get to the big pine tree in the center of the pass. I'll take the point man. You take the second. On my shot. Diaz, you engage the rear element after we fire. Suppress them. We'll handle the middle. Fire and move. Don't stay in one place." Gator was now operating on pure training, the shock and confusion replaced by the familiar adrenaline of a firefight. But as he settled in beside her, he noticed something. She wasn't breathing heavily. Her hands weren't shaking. She was as still and placid as a frozen lake. He had seen combat veterans, hardened operators, who showed more nerves before a fight than she was showing now. The insurgents came into view, just as she'd predicted. 6 men, rifles held loosely, tracking the footprints in the snow. Their leader, wearing a paycall, was talking to the man next to him. They were walking into a perfectly prepared trap. Gator's heart hammered against his ribs. He centered his sights on the second man in the column. He glanced at Sharma. Her eye was pressed to her optic, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. She was utterly immobile. She waited. She let them walk deeper and deeper into the kill zone. The tension was unbearable. Gator's muscles screamed for him to fire. Then, her voice came, a soft whisper that was almost lost in the wind. "Steady." The lead insurgent reached the pine tree. "Engage," she said. Her rifle cracked a single, sharp report. The point man's head snapped back, and he dropped without a sound. A split second later, Gator's rifle barked, and the second man crumpled. The quiet valley erupted into chaos. Diaz opened up from above, his automatic fire chewing up the snow around the rear of the enemy column, forcing them to dive for cover. 2 of the remaining insurgents recovered quickly, returning fire wildly toward Gator and Sharma's position. Rounds snapped overhead and ricocheted off the boulder with angry whines. "Shifting," Sharma called out. In a single, fluid motion, she was up and moving, sprinting 10 yards to a different cluster of rocks before dropping back into cover. Gator, following her lead, did the same. The insurgents' fire was now directed at their old position. Sharma fired twice more, 2 precise, calculated shots. A third insurgent, trying to flank them, fell clutching his chest. A fourth, trying to set up a PKM, slumped over his machine gun. Her marksmanship was brutally effective. She wasn't spraying and praying. Every round had a purpose. In less than 30 seconds, the fight had turned into a slaughter. The last 2 insurgents, panicked and broken, scrambled to their feet and tried to flee back up the trail. "Diaz, don't let them go," Sharma commanded. From his perch, Diaz's rifle spoke again, and the final two combatants fell. Silence returned to the valley, heavy and absolute. The only sound was the wind and the ringing in Gator's ears. He stared at the still forms lying in the snow. 6 men, neutralized in under a minute with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. He looked over at Sharma. She was already reloading, her face a mask of cold focus. She had a long, bloody gash on her left forearm from a piece of shrapnel during the crash, and it had reopened during her sprint. Without a word, she propped her rifle against the rock and began to push up the sleeve of her utility jacket to get a better look at the wound. Gator started to move toward her, his mind reeling. "Master Guns, you're—" His voice died in his throat. As she pushed the fabric of her sleeve past her elbow, a tattoo was revealed on the pale skin of her inner forearm. It was not a colorful piece of barracks art. It was a stark, monochromatic design, inked in black and gray. It was a skeletal, hooded wraith, its form dissolving into smoke at the base, its bony fingers coiled around the needle of a shattered compass rose. The compass pointed to no direction. North, south, east, west, all were broken. Gator froze. His blood ran cold. He was Force Recon. He'd heard the stories, the dark, whispered legends that were told in hushed tones in secured briefing rooms and late-night drinking sessions. The ghost stories of the Spec Ops community. Rumors of a unit that didn't exist on any official roster. A blacker-than-black element used for missions that were never spoken of, whose members were drawn from the best of all branches and then vanished from their records. They had no name, only myths. The Nomads, the Spectres, the Janitors, the unit that went where no one else could, and whose symbol was said to be a variation of a lost wanderer, a ghost with no home, a wraith and a broken compass. Corporal Miller, watching from his position, had also seen it. His jaw was slack. Diaz, scrambling down from his overwatch, stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes locked on her arm. The air crackled with a new, profound silence. The mockery, the condescension, the doubt. It all evaporated, replaced by a deep, primal shock that bordered on fear. This woman, this 48-year-old logistics chief they had dismissed as a paper pusher, was one of them. No, she wasn't one of them. She was something more, something they only told stories about. Gator finally found his voice, the word a choked whisper, barely audible. What unit is that?" Sharma paused, intending to her wound. She looked down at the tattoo on her arm, then up at him. Her eyes held no pride, no satisfaction. There was only a quiet, weary resignation. She didn't answer his question. She didn't have to. The wraith on her arm spoke for her, a silent testament to a life lived in the shadows, a life they couldn't possibly comprehend. The reveal was complete. The master gunnery sergeant of logistics was gone. In her place stood a legend they never believed was real. The dynamic of the small, battered group had irrevocably shifted. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The air, once thick with Gator's bravado and the team's casual disrespect, was now heavy with a stunned, deferential silence. The 3 recon Marines looked at Sharma not as a high-ranking logistician, but as something akin to a mythical creature revealed in the flesh. Gator, who had challenged her at every turn, now stood stiffly, his eyes avoiding the tattoo on her arm as if it might burn him. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet aftermath of the firefight. "What's the plan, Master Guns?" he asked. The question was not a challenge. It was a plea for direction. The swagger was gone, replaced by the earnest query of a subordinate to a commander he implicitly trusted. Sharma finished wrapping her forearm with a field dressing. The gash was clean, the bleeding stopped. She flexed her fingers, testing the tightness of the bandage, her expression giving nothing away. "The plan hasn't changed," she said, her voice even. "We moved to the box canyon. That firefight was loud. Even if they didn't have a radio, someone heard it. A larger force will be dispatched to investigate. We need to be gone before they get here." "Yes, Master Guns," Gator replied instantly. She turned to Diaz. "Sergeant Davies and I will take the litter. You take point." Move 50 meters ahead of us. We're looking for signs of another patrol or prepared positions. Don't skyline yourself. Use the terrain. Aye, Master Guns, Diaz said, his voice tight with respect. He looked from her to Gator, a silent question in his eyes. Gator just gave a short, sharp nod. Do what she says. As they prepared to move Miller, Sharma's actions remained the same. Efficient, practical. But the way the others responded was entirely different. When she adjusted the straps on the litter, Gator moved to assist without being asked. When she handed Diaz 2 spare magazines, he took them with a nod of gratitude. They were a team now, but the leader was unequivocally the one they had mocked just hours before. The trek to the box canyon was arduous. Miller, despite the morphine, groaned with every jarring step. Sharma and Gator, sharing the weight of the litter, strained with the effort, their breath pluming in the cold air. But there were no complaints. The recon Marines, trained to endure extreme hardship, pushed on, their resolve hardened by the presence of the woman in their midst. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were operating. They reached the canyon as dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the snow-covered peaks. It was exactly as Sharma had described it from her brief look at the map. A deep, narrow cut into the rock, with sheer walls on 3 sides and a single defensible entrance. A small, clear spring trickled from a fissure in the rock face. It was a perfect holdout position. Diaz, set up an OP at the mouth of the canyon, Sharma ordered. Find a position with good cover and concealment. Radio silence. You report on visual contact only. Gator, get a fire going in the deepest part of the canyon. Small, smokeless if you can. We need to get Miller warm. As Gator and Diaz moved to follow her orders, Sharma knelt beside Miller. She checked his splint and gave him a small sip of water. How you doing, Corporal? She asked, her voice softer now that the immediate tactical threat had passed. Miller looked up at her, his eyes clear despite the pain and the drugs. My leg feels like it's on fire, Master Guns, he admitted. But I'll live, he paused, then added, I saw what you did back there, with the rifle. I've never seen shooting like that, not even from our instructors. Sharma just nodded, pulling a thermal blanket from her pack and tucking it around him. Rest. Your job is to heal. Later that night, as a small, carefully shielded fire crackled in the back of the canyon, the 3 conscious Marines sat in a tight circle. The cold was biting, but the rock walls offered protection from the wind. Gator had been silent for hours, his mind replaying the day's events. The crash, the ambush, the reveal. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. I'm sorry, Master Gunnery Sergeant. Sharma looked up from the rifle she was meticulously cleaning. She had disassembled it completely, laying the parts out on a clean cloth. Her movements were a familiar, soothing ritual. For what, Sergeant? For my conduct, he said, forcing himself to meet her gaze. Back at the FOB, on the bird. I was unprofessional. I was an ass. Sharma wiped a patch of carbon from the bolt carrier group, her expression unreadable in the firelight. You made an assumption based on the information you had, she said simply. It's a common mistake. It's not an excuse, Gator insisted. We're recon. We're supposed to be better than that. We're supposed to assess a situation, not run our mouths. He looked down at his hands. We underestimated you. Badly. Respect is earned, Sergeant. It isn't issued with the rank, Sharma said, her voice quiet. You know that. Your team knows that. She began to reassemble the rifle, the pieces clicking together with practiced precision. Today, we all earned a little. The statement hung in the air. It was not an absolution, but an acknowledgement. A statement of fact from a woman who dealt in nothing else. Just then, a faint, rhythmic thump-thump-thump began to echo through the canyon walls. It was distant, but growing louder. A helicopter. Diaz came sprinting back from the entrance. Master Guns. Chopper coming in. Can't tell if it's friendly. Sharma was already on her feet, grabbing the salvaged comms gear. She handed Gator the ELT. It's a rescue bird. They picked up the black box signal from the wreck. Get to the mouth of the canyon. Activate the beacon for 30 seconds, then shut it off. Give them a target, but don't leave it on long enough for anyone else to get a fix. As Gator ran to comply, Sharma worked on the radio, patching it into the salvaged aircraft battery. The radio crackled to life. She grabbed the handset, listened for a moment, then keyed the mic. Her transmission was short, coded. Vulture's Nest, this is Wanderer Actual. I have a package for you. Authenticate Sierra Tango November. A voice crackled back instantly, professional and calm. Wanderer Actual, we read you. Authentication confirmed. Stand by for recovery. Gator and Diaz stared, first at the radio, then at her. Wanderer Actual. It was a call sign. A call sign tied to the myths to the tattoo. A few minutes later, a blacked-out M60 Black Hawk, flying without lights, swooped into the canyon mouth, its rotors kicking up a vortex of snow. 2 pararescue jumpers, PJs, rappelled down. As the first PJ landed, he saw Sharma, and his posture immediately changed. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, a sign of recognition between members of a very small, very exclusive club. He didn't see a master gunnery sergeant. He saw a fellow ghost. Back at FOB Kestrel, Colonel Thorne stood on the darkened flight line, his arms crossed. The report from the rescue team had been brief and cryptic. For survivors, all hostile contacts neutralized. Master Gunnery Sergeant Sharma in command. His aide had handed him a file folder just minutes before. It was Sharma's record, the real one, unlocked by a priority command from the Pentagon after the crash. Most of it was still blacked out, but the commendations that were visible told a story of a career spent far from any supply depot. Multiple Navy crosses, a silver star, and a single, heavily redacted line item, seconded to Special Operations Command, Task Force 141, designation, Nomad. As the Black Hawk landed and the survivors were helped onto the tarmac, Thorne's eyes found Sharma. She was walking on her own, refusing assistance, though her face was pale with fatigue. The medics were already moving toward Miller's litter. Thorne walked forward, stopping directly in front of her. The arrogant recon Marines, Gator and Diaz, stood a respectful distance behind her, their heads bowed slightly. They looked like acolytes in the presence of an oracle. The colonel looked at the makeshift bandage on her arm, at the exhaustion etched onto her face, and at the unyielding strength in her eyes. The dismissive, condescending officer from the day before was gone. In his place was a man confronted with a reality far beyond his rigid understanding of the Marine Corps. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he raised his hand in a sharp, perfect salute. "Welcome back, Master Gunnery Sergeant," he said, his voice quiet, heavy with a respect that was absolute. "Your desk is waiting for you," he paused. "Take as long as you need." Sharma returned the salute, her movements as crisp as his. "Thank you, Colonel," she replied, "but there's an audit that needs finishing." The night was quiet at FOB Kestrel, the chaos of the day having settled into the exhausted hum of generators and distant radios. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit space that had been assigned to her as a temporary office and barracks, Anya Sharma sat on the edge of her cot. The room was sparse, a metal cot, a field desk, a steel locker. It was anonymous, transient, just like every other temporary home she'd had for the past 2 decades. She had refused the infirmary, accepting only a new field dressing for the gash on her arm from a corpsman whose hands trembled slightly as he worked. Now she was alone. On the desk, her rifle was once again disassembled. It lay on a clean cloth, each component wiped clean of the dust and grime of the Tangi Valley, each piece gleaming dully under the harsh light. Cleaning her weapon was a ritual, a form of meditation. It was a way to process, to compartmentalize, to bring order back to a world that thrived on chaos. It was the only confession she ever made. Her sleeve was rolled up, the black and gray tattoo stark against her skin, the skeletal wraith and its broken compass. It was a symbol of a promise, that you would always be lost, but you would always be sent where you were needed most. A quiet pact made in a place and time she no longer spoke of. She picked up the bolt, her fingers tracing the smooth, cold steel. She remembered the weight of a different rifle, the chill of a different mountain range, the face of a different enemy. The memories were ghosts always present, but kept at bay by discipline and the simple, mechanical task at hand. The door to her quarters creaked open. She didn't look up, but her hands stilled. She knew who it was from the sound of the footsteps, hesitant, respectful. Corporal Miller stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a pair of crutches, his leg encased in a heavy-duty field cast. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, at the disassembled rifle, at the tattoo. He took a slow, awkward step into the room and placed something on the corner of her desk. It was a canteen, full, the metal cold and sweating condensation. Beside it, he placed a single sealed MRE, a pound cake, the unofficial currency of respect among grunts. It was a silent offering, an acknowledgement, a thank you that words couldn't properly convey. It was the gesture of a young warrior to a seasoned veteran, a recognition of a shared trial and a debt he knew he could never truly repay. He had seen the legend behind the rank. Sharma slowly raised her head, her gaze meeting his. She looked at the canteen, then at him. There was no grand speech, no dramatic moment of bonding. There was only the quiet understanding that passed between two people who had faced death together. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Acknowledgement given and received. Miller nodded back, a weight seeming to lift from his shoulders. He backed out of the room as quietly as he had entered, pulling the door gently shut behind him. Sharma was alone again. She looked at the canteen for a long moment, then picked up the rifle's bolt carrier group and continued her work. The rhythmic, metallic clicks of the weapon coming back together were the only sounds. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky, silhouetting the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush. The night watch was ending. A new day was beginning. The audit would continue. The war would go on. And Master Gunnery Sergeant Anya Sharma, the logistician, the ghost, would be ready. The respect had been earned in silence and blood, and in silence it was accepted.